9 hikers vanished in the snow. Their bodies were found, mutilated, barefoot, and burned. No answers, no mercy, only whispers, radiation, and a mountain that still screams. Whatever happened never left. They were supposed to return by February 12th. 9 hikers, young, experienced, disciplined. All of them had trekked through worse terrain before. Snowstorms didn't scare them. Cold didn't stop them. They were all students or graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute. This trip was planned to the hour, meticulously logged, mapped, calculated. The route was labeled as Category Roman 3, the most difficult, but these were the kind of people who looked difficulty straight in the eye and kept walking. They were last seen on January 27th in a small village, the last point of civilization before they disappeared into the wild Urals. They promised to send a telegram to the sports club back home once they finished the hike. It should have arrived no later than February 12th. February 12th came and went. No message. At first, no one panicked. Delays were common, bad weather, slower progress. But when February 16th arrived without a word, the Institute raised the alarm. Families called. Friends waited. The first search party was made of volunteers, students, teachers, a few rescue workers. A second wave followed, armed with helicopters, dogs, even military personnel. Something was wrong. Everyone felt it. They reached the site on February 26th. Waste, deep snow, cutting winds. The landscape looked like a blank page, white and silent. But the rescuers saw what didn't belong. The edge of a tent peeking through a snowdrift. It was half buried. They dug frantically. What they uncovered didn't make sense. The tent was slashed open from the inside, not unzipped, not torn by wind or avalanche, sliced deliberately from within. Their boots were still inside, lined neatly, jackets hung from pegs, but no one was there. Nothing was stolen, supplies untouched. It looked like they had all left in a blind panic, rushing out into the storm barefoot or wearing only socks. That's when they found the footprints, 9 sets, leading away from the tent in various directions, but all eventually turned toward the trees. Not staggered or wild, but calmly placed, as if they walked, not ran. Some were barefoot, some showed only socks. One had a single boot. The trail stretched into the forest, disappearing beneath fresh snowfall. They followed them, about a kilometer down, just beneath the edge of the tree line. They found the first 2 bodies. They lay side by side, as if they'd collapsed together. No shirts, no coats, just their underwear and bare skin, frozen to the earth. A dead fire smoldered nearby, long since extinguished. Branches above them had been broken off, neatly snapped, 5 meters high. One of them had skin torn from his palms, his hands worn raw from climbing. Climbing what, though? The searchers didn't speak. They didn't need to. Something was wrong. Something was horribly wrong. This wasn't a simple case of exposure or getting lost. People don't slice open their own tents and run barefoot into -30 temperatures unless they're running from something. 3 more bodies were found days later, scattered between the tent and the tree line. As if they were trying to return, their poses told a story, crawling, collapsed, twisted. One had a fractured skull, no bruising, no external wound. Another's face was contorted in what rescuers would later describe as sheer terror, frozen in place. But not all of them had been found. The final 4 were still missing. Helicopters buzzed overhead. Dogs sniffed through snowdrifts. The search grew colder, more desperate. People began to speculate. Avalanche, wild animals, hypothermia, induced madness. But none of it explained the tent. None of it explained the cuts, the fire, the broken branches, the bare footprints walking calmly into death. The night the tent was found, A seasoned mountain guide who had joined the rescue team refused to camp near the site. He left his gear and walked through the night back to base camp. When asked why, he simply said, "Something watched us. That was the 6th day, and that was just the beginning." They followed the footprints in silence. There were 9 sets, some barely visible beneath the drift, others perfectly preserved in the frozen crust. Most were barefoot. A few showed signs of socks. Just one, had a boot. The trail didn't meander. It moved in a single direction, downhill, toward the dark line of trees in the distance. Not frantic, not scattered, not running. They had walked, one after the other, into the forest, half dressed in a storm that could kill a man in minutes. The silence among the searchers grew heavier the further they went. Trees stood like frozen sentinels, their branches weighed down with ice. The prints stopped abruptly at the edge of the woods, and just beyond them they found the first 2 bodies. They were lying side by side, a few meters from what was once a fire, charred wood, blackened snow, and the faint, chemical scent of smoke, long extinguished. The boy's skin was waxy, frost-bitten gray. Both were stripped to their underwear, no coats, no boots, no gloves. One had a torn undershirt still clinging to his chest. The other was shirtless, his limbs splayed unnaturally as if frozen mid-movement. Their hands were a mess, bloodied, shredded, raw to the bone. Not animal wounds, not frostbite, scratches, splinters, dozens of them. The rescuers tilted their heads upward. A tall cedar stood behind the bodies, its lower branches broken clean. 5 meters high, something had climbed that tree, or tried to. The bark was scuffed and gouged, handholds dug deep into the trunk. It looked like someone had scrambled up it in terror, trying to get away from something on the ground. There were no other tracks nearby. Who, or what, they had been running from, no one could say, but they hadn't made it far, and whatever they had feared, it had driven them out of the tent with no time to dress, no time to think. Just time to flee. One of the searchers knelt beside a body, trying to shield it from the wind. He said nothing, just stared at the face, at the open mouth, the expression frozen in agony, teeth clenched. Eyes wide, as if he had seen something no man should ever see. They photographed everything, logged the coordinates, marked the trees, but the deeper they searched, the colder the trail became, literally and otherwise. The temperature had dropped well below -30°C that night. No one should have survived more than a few hours. Yet, based on the remains of the fire, the 2 had lasted longer, long enough to break branches, to bleed into the bark, to try to survive. It made no sense. Nearby, buried beneath a shallow layer of snow, they found torn scraps of clothing, sleeves, a strip of wool, part of a scarf. None of it matched what the 2 had been wearing. It was as if someone else had been there. Someone who hadn't been found yet, or had returned to the tent alone. The investigators began to whisper, not rumors, not superstition, just raw confusion. Too many pieces didn't fit. Where were the others? Why hadn't they stayed together? Why hadn't they taken boots, coats, flashlights? Why did they cut through the tent instead of going out through the flap? Nothing fit the pattern of any natural event. Later, when one of the search dogs refused to enter the forest line, a local whispered an old word none of the outsiders recognized. The translator wouldn't repeat it. All anyone knew for certain was that 2 boys had died here, slowly, with their fingers in splinters and their breath steaming out into the night until it stopped, and no one could explain why. They kept combing the slope between the forest and the tent. Snow fell lightly, almost gently, as if trying to bury what still remained. The wind had stilled, but it didn't bring peace, just silence that seemed to press into the bones. After finding the 2 near the fire, they expected the rest would be nearby. But there was nothing. Days passed. Dogs barked into the trees but led nowhere. Metal detectors clicked faintly over the snow. They moved further out in widening spirals, careful not to miss the smallest clue. Then, scattered over a span of a few hundred meters, they found 3 more bodies, not clustered, not together. They were lying apart, half, buried beneath drifted snow. One was found face down, hands clenched, crawling uphill. The second was a few meters away, turned onto his side as if he had collapsed mid-step. The third lay on his back, mouth open, frozen mid-breath, as if he had been trying to speak. Their positions said more than words ever could. All 3 were facing back toward the tent, back toward safety. It looked like they had been trying to return. Something had driven them out. Something had scattered them, and in the end, something had made them desperate enough to try crawling back, even through the killing cold. They examined the bodies one by one. 2 showed signs of frostbite and exhaustion, no external wounds, no bruising, but the third, that one was different. His skull was fractured, a deep internal break. Blood had pooled inside, likely killing him within minutes, but there was no damage to the outside, no cuts, no swelling, no indication of what caused it. It looked as if something had crushed his head from the inside. A force with no trace, no weapon nearby, no marks on the snow. It wasn't a fall, not in that terrain, not with that kind of wound, and it wasn't an avalanche. The snow was undisturbed around him. They couldn't explain it. Forensics ruled it a force comparable to a car crash, but with no point of impact. It was the kind of thing that leaves investigators pacing in silence, looking over their shoulders. They were supposed to bring answers back to the families. Instead, they brought back more questions. One searcher, a young volunteer, said it felt like walking into a story that had already ended, like picking up the last pages of a book without ever seeing how it began. Every body they found told part of the truth, but the truth didn't make sense. The snow was thin in places, packed hard in others. They dug further, hoping to find tracks, anything that could explain what had happened. But there was nothing, no signs of struggle, no trails beyond the original footprints. It was as if the 3 had simply fallen, one by one, without cause, without warning. Still, no sign of the last 4. The radio team back at base began to worry, not about the hikers, about the searchers. Something wasn't right with the air up there. Communications grew slower. Voices quieted. No one spoke about it directly, but the fear had changed. It was no longer about what they'd find. It was about what they wouldn't understand. Some began to whisper about the missing 4. Maybe they'd made it out. Maybe they were still alive. But no one believed that. Not really. Not in those temperatures, not after this long. And then there was the way all 3 had been found facing back. None of them had died running. They died trying to come home. It was May when the last 4 were found. 2 full months had passed since the first bodies were recovered. The snow had melted in parts, softening the ground, revealing what winter had hidden. Rescuers returned to the site, not because they expected answers, but because the families hadn't buried everyone yet. They followed a narrow stream trickling through the ravine, deeper than the rest of the forest, lower than the place where the tent and footprints had been. The air was different down there, heavier, quieter, almost like sound didn't want to travel. At the bottom, half buried under snow and soil, the dogs caught scent. A shallow den had formed naturally from packed snow melting above them. That's where they found the final 4. All of them huddled together, close as if for warmth. But this wasn't a death from cold. The first body they pulled from the dirt was a man. His skull had caved in, but not from the outside, not a fall, not an impact with a rock. The doctors said the injury had the force of a speeding car, but without any sign of surface trauma. The second had broken ribs, 3 of them. The bone shards had punctured his heart and lungs, but his clothing was barely torn. The third was found underneath the others. He had no major wounds, just fear etched into every muscle of his frozen face. Then there was the girl. Her body was found wrapped tightly in another's jacket, one that didn't belong to her. They only realized it later, when they compared what the others had worn. She had someone else's sweater, someone else's pants, layered and patched like they had all begun sharing what little remained before the end. But it was her condition that silenced everyone. Her tongue was missing. Not bitten off, not chewed or cut. It had been removed, neatly, cleanly, deep at the root. There was no blood around the mouth, no wounds on the lips, as if whatever happened had occurred after death, or in a way no one could explain. Her eyes were missing too. Empty sockets stared up from the snow, wide and white, as though she'd been trying to see something until the last moment. One of the forensic experts dropped his report halfway through writing it. He wouldn't speak again for the rest of the trip. The clothing all 4 wore tested positive for radiation, small amounts but measurable, higher than background levels, too high to ignore. One jacket registered levels strong enough to concern the military. The origin unknown, the explanation classified. They had all died in a place where the snow was untouched, where no sign of struggle existed, no drag marks, no blood trail, just 4 young people crawling into a final shelter beneath the ravine, trying to survive what they couldn't explain. Some said they were escaping something, others said they were hiding, and the strangest part, the clothes, they weren't wearing their own. The girl had the pants of the boy found under the tree, the one with the shredded hands. Another wore fragments from 2 different people, stitched, tied, layered. Some pieces were burned, others were inside out, as if pulled off in haste or desperation. It looked less like dressing and more like scavenging. Like they'd stripped the bodies of the dead in hopes of surviving just a little longer. Or maybe something else had done the stripping. The medical team refused to speculate. The autopsies read like riddles. Lethal internal injuries without external trauma, removed organs without bleeding, radiation without source, no footprints around the site, no sign of animals, no defensive wounds, nothing added up. The last 4 had died close to each other. But not together, not peacefully. They had died badly, one choking, one crushed, one frozen in pure terror, one silenced forever. Whatever had happened in that forest hadn't ended with the storm. It had followed them into the ground, into the dark, into the place where no one was supposed to go. And even in death, it had left a mark. Among the items recovered from the site was a small, battered notebook. Its corners were frozen stiff, pages water-stained, edges torn, but most of it was legible. It belonged to one of the hikers. He had been documenting the journey from day 1, weather updates, trail notes, jokes about frozen boots and missing gloves, the kind of things that speak of youth and endurance, of shared hardship among friends. The last entry was written just before they vanished. It ended mid-sentence, no warning, no punctuation, just a fragment of thought trailing off into the white space of the page. It was like someone had lifted the pen from his hand and never let him finish. Investigators reread it again and again, looking for a hidden clue, some sudden fear, some panic, anything, but there was nothing, just a half-thought caught in place like breath in cold air. They found film, too. Cameras packed tightly in snow, damp bags, some still intact. When developed, the photos showed them laughing, setting up the tent, climbing through knee-deep snow. Nothing unusual at first. but as the roll continued, expressions changed. Smiles grew tighter, the lighting shifted, then abrupt blackouts, half-developed shots, blurs that looked like hands too close to the lens, shapes caught in motion, indistinct, fast. And one image no one could ever fully explain. A glowing smear, faint and high above the tree line, suspended in sky but leaving no trail. The film was passed around quietly between agencies. Then it was taken. There were drawings, too, found folded inside a side pocket of a weatherproof map pouch, childlike sketches, scribbled figures standing in rows, tall, thin, eyes hollow, limbs stretched like shadows cast by firelight. Underneath one sketch, a single word, watchers. Another had them standing beneath the stars, staring upward as if waiting for something. None of the group had any history of delusions, no signs of psychological instability. Every one of them had passed state health exams. Still, the drawings chilled even the most hardened examiners. They didn't feel like art, they felt like memory. Then came the whispers. Locals had always warned travelers about that mountain. They called it Dead Mountain, not just for the wind or snow, but because people didn't return the same, or at all. The Mansi tribes who lived closest to the range avoided it completely, not out of superstition, but instinct. One elder said the mountain sings at night. Another warned of men of the snow, figures seen walking when no one else should be there, white as the ice, faceless and fast. The searchers laughed at first. But one night after returning from the ridge, a soldier refused to go back up. He wouldn't say why, just packed his bag and left before dawn. The official report finally came out weeks later. It was thin, sterile, carefully worded. The cause of death, it stated, was an unknown compelling natural force. No elaboration, no theory, just that phrase, unknown, compelling, natural. It covered everything while meaning nothing. The press was given a copy. Then the files were pulled, sealed, and marked confidential. What followed wasn't an explanation. It was silence. One by one, the team members who had examined the bodies were reassigned. Most stopped talking, some retired early. A few, according to unofficial channels, refused interviews completely. Years later, when a journalist tried to obtain the raw files through the state archive, entire sections were missing. Audio tapes corrupted, photographs lost, names blacked out. They had evidence. They had diaries, film, maps, timelines. They had trauma wounds no avalanche could explain. They had radiation where none should be. But none of it changed anything, because no one wanted to admit what it all pointed to. Today, there's a rusted memorial where the tent once stood. Just a slab of metal fastened to a crooked post, weather, beaten and quiet. No names, no details. Just a mark that something happened here, something no one could explain, and maybe no one was meant to. Each year, a few hikers still come. Not many. They follow the old trail, traced roughly from recovered notes and search maps. Some come for answers, others for thrill. Most don't stay long. One group made it halfway up before turning around. The leader said their compasses began spinning wildly as soon as they reached the forest's edge. None of the digital equipment worked. Not the GPS, not the emergency beacon, batteries drained within minutes. They tried to laugh it off, tried to keep walking, but the farther they went, the quieter everything got. The snow began to fall straight down, no wind, the air grew thick, and then the screaming started. They said it wasn't close, but it wasn't far either. It echoed through the trees in short bursts, like something injured, then suddenly silent. Not an animal, not anything they'd ever heard before. They called out, thinking someone might be hurt, but no one answered. After the second night, they packed their things and left. When they got back to the trailhead, one of them, an older man with military survival training, just sat down on the snow and cried. Another solo traveler visited the site just before winter set in. He reached the memorial alone and set up camp near the same tree line. His video logs were clear, windy but calm, snow light, visibility decent. On the second night, his voice changed. He was talking about the cold and the wind, then paused mid-sentence and turned to the forest. He said, "Did someone just," then static. The camera came back on 2 hours later. The lens was pointed at the trees. A shape moved past the edge of the frame, white, long, like a figure walking between trunks. The camera stayed on all night, lens frosted over, recording silence. He was never found. Search teams located the campsite. The tent was intact. Gear was packed neatly. His boots were there, but no footprints leaving camp. No drag marks, nothing, just snow unbroken. Locals won't go past the ridge. They say the mountain doesn't like strangers anymore, not since that winter. They speak of the voices that ride the wind, mimics. One hiker who braved the slopes alone swore he heard his brother calling his name from behind him, even though his brother had died years before. Others claim to hear laughter, light, breathless, distant, like someone running just out of sight. Sometimes the trees don't match the map, paths curve wrong, shadows fall in directions that don't follow the sun, and some leave offerings at the base, small things. Bread, salt, a ribbon tied to a branch. One man left his wedding ring and refused to say why. They say the mountain remembers. The memorial rusts slowly, covered most months in snow. It leans a little more every year. But it's still there, a mark left behind by something that still watches, still listens, still waits. And whatever happened up there didn't die with them, it stayed. Buried in the ice, carried on the wind, hidden in the silence between the trees, unchanged, unanswered, undisturbed. And that's where we leave it, at the edge of a frozen silence, buried in snow, beneath a mountain that still won't speak. 9 young souls went in, full of life, laughter, and trust in each other. None of them came back. What happened between the tent and the trees, between the fire and the ravine, between the scream and the silence, remains sealed by ice and fear. The evidence is all there. But none of it adds up. A diary that ends mid-sentence, cameras that stop recording, broken bodies with no clear cause, radiation with no origin, footprints that shouldn't exist, and above all, the one thing no one can explain, why they ran into the dark in the first place. Even today, the wind still howls over Dead Mountain. People still hear voices, and sometimes, long after nightfall, a scream rises from the snow, but no one is ever found. Whatever chased them into the cold never left. Some secrets aren't buried, they are protected by the mountain, by the silence, by whatever still waits out there, watching, and this story, like the mountain itself, remains untouched.